Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to the Occult Explorers. I'm your hostess, Snappy, and I'm joined by my good friend, Dion. How's it going, Dion?
Glad to be here.
Amazing. And we're back for part 3 of our deep dive into the New Mexico mysteries. But before we get into that, as always, we want to begin with a little disclaimer. First and foremost, we're explorers. We're exploring ideas. We're just here to talk about stories. We try not to pass judgment. We try not to discuss whether things are true or false. We're just discussing beliefs, ideas, ideologies, and exploring everything that's related to these things for fun and for entertainment. On top of that, we like to go down into the nitty gritty where it gets deep and dark. So if you have any issues with sexual content, graphic language, or violence, be prepared that we will be having all of that in today's episode. So, Dion, where did we leave off in the New Mexico mysteries last time?
Well, I was trying to break it down into 3 sections. Into the first peoples, indigenous peoples, Navajo, Pueblo, Hopi, the conquistador phase, which is the Spanish Church, Catholic Church, and secret societies that they had. And then the third phase was UFOs, military, space, rockets, the future. So we got past, present, future, we could kind of say. And today is going to be the third episode, exploring more about these mysteries. We talked a lot about Chaco Canyon being archeoastronomy, an observatory to chart the suns. In episode 1, we showed the solar dagger, which, the light would reflect through the stones and map over the course of a 9 spoked spiral equinoxes and solstices, things like that. And in the other episode, we talked about the supernova that happened years ago that was assigned to them, to the different tribes around the world.
This was around the 1600s, if I remember, and it was something that was documented many different places, so it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think this one was at 1054, if I'm not mistaken, was when it triggered an exodus. We talked about the relationship between Mexico and the Mexican Aztec, Mayan, Olmec tribes in the relationship to the Indians, and what we consider
this whole gambler mythology, right?
Yeah.
That where the Aztecs came from,
and that's northern Mexico. Before these borders, before American borders or conquistador Spanish borders, New Spain or Mexican borders, that was northern Mexico. It's related. And they had a trade between the tribes with macaw feathers, chocolate, a lot of different things. They had abalone shells from California, copper from different mines. And so we talked about the gambler, like you're saying, the gambler again, it was a person who took over that whole culture using gambling, using entheogens, using ritualized games. Like the Mayan ball court was based
they had
on
those running roads you were showing us.
Yeah. And NASA actually has mapped out these roads. There's miles of them, and they don't lead to nowhere. They're celestial alignments. And so that's what I'm saying. There's a history that deals with the indigenous people, the conquistador, the missions, and the church and secret societies, and then up to the present with NASA and the military industrial complex.
Yeah, we also talked about the priests in those. They were doing that secret society of the penitents who were reenacting the crucifixions. And when we say reenacting, we mean putting each other up on crosses.
Well, we'll get more into them today because leading up to this, so it's archeoastronomy. That's a big focus, let's say, in these episodes. The relationship between the New Mexico geography to the night sky and the stars and the cultures on the ground in secret societies and theogens and different things. So let's start with the first pick. And this is going to get graphic. Trigger warning. You could still click off. It's not too late. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep.
Here we go.
the priest killer, the priest killing Kachina.
Oh, wow.
You see a knife in one hand, a head in the other hand with the cross, a crucifix.
And you notice the skin of this person, they look pretty Spanish to me,
Yeah. And so how did this come about? Well, we talked about the conquistadors taking over and founding a new Spain there. Well, the Pueblo tribes weren't happy, and they didn't give up that easy. And the final straw was in 1680 when, we talked about the Inquisition had set up shop there, and they were looking for crypto Jews or Jewish folks that had came from Spain to hide from them. They were looking for witches. They were trying to also stop the Native American rituals and ceremonies. And so in 1680, they passed an edict that the tribes could no longer use Kachina dolls, no longer do dances, and no longer take entheogens or psychoactive substances.
Wow.
And so they revolted. And that's when it was an intertribal revolt. The Pueblos got together.
Yeah, I did some reading. Reading on this.
Tell us about it. Tell us.
So freaking wild. So what ended up happening was they decided they were going to persecute specifically the medicine men, and they rounded up the 11 most prominent medicine men of the Pueblo and they have 12 or so tribes. And they wound up executing 3 of them. And one of them committed suicide before execution. And then they wound up pardoning after putting into the stocks the others. Well, one of the others was this particular really famous Pueblo named Pope.
Pope.
Yeah. And Pope, he becomes sort of like a charismatic revitalist leader among the Pueblo. Like, this is beyond incredible when we put this into perspective. He's being oppressed by the Spanish. He manages to rile up all of these various, not just the Pueblo, but all these other different indigenous peoples of New Mexico. He speaks over 6 different languages. And in the stories, he's said to have run over 500 miles between these different tribes. And he rallies them all together to cause a revolt that comes to fruition in 1680 against the Spanish. And they successfully managed to kick them out of New Mexico territory. It's a very powerful story. And Pope is still famous among the Pueblo. He actually set up his capital in Taos after he was kicked out of San Jose, which was where he was from originally. And they have statues to him to this day. Like they famously built one in 2005. So still a very widely recognized figure, even though he's kind of controversial at the same time, right?
Well, one of the members of the revolt was Yowie. And that's where he was famous for he attacked and killed priests because they were raping women, the priests that raped the Indian women. And that's what he earned this title. And later on, they turned him into a Kachina doll. And unfortunately, it was only like 10 or 12 years later before they did something called the Reconquista. The Reconquista. They took back over,
Of course, they always do.
They bring more, and they bring the guns, they bring more, or whatever it is, they bring more. And they come and take it back over. And what's unique about this is that up to 5 years ago, they've been celebrating this event. Let's hit the next pick, and we'll get into this.
You're still who's celebrating the Reconquista? Like the Spanish people or
no,
the Catholics?
Right there. That's downtown New Mexico.
Oh, that's disgusting.
And this was called the Entrada Pageant, and it means incursion. And they would sell, and this started September 16th, 1712. They founded this in New Mexico, where once a year they would dress up as conquistadores and go through town celebrating taking back the Pueblo from the Indians.
God, from destroying Pope and his people. Wow.
Yeah. So finally, they banned this in 2018. They got together with the Senate at the New Mexico legislator and said, "Hey, you can't do this."
Gosh,
this is not cool.
Gaia, holy crap!
and you see the conquistadors in the picture there. Their outfits, they love it. They're walking with their heads up, all with these looks on their faces, like, This is their magic moment. They're celebrating. And because part of these societies, there were secret societies that were part of the conquest, not just conquistadors or Jesuit order. We talked about Santiago and some of the different secret orders they had, So yeah. And so this is unfortunate part of New Mexico's history, because we got to get into the history of it. And so next, let's hit the next picture.
It's also kind of wild that we're seeing these two competing kind of cultural mythologies existing in New Mexico. While these people are still dressing up like conquistadors all the way to 2018, the Pueblo are still celebrating Pope and building statues to him as well.
That's right.
Interesting contrast. Right. It's still an ongoing cultural war. It never really ended.
So here's the Chemo Theater, Albuquerque. We got a symbol there up on the wall. They call it the lost symbol because, if you've ever seen the New Mexico state flag, it has a sun symbol. Well, this was the original symbol of the New Mexico state flag, was the swastika. It's just called the lost symbol because it was removed early. Remember, I showed you the picture of the intertribal meeting. They came together and the different tribes signed off on the swastika. They said, no, we will no longer use our own sacred symbol because of what you have done to it.
That's so sad, but I understand it at the same time.
Yeah. Like I said, it's called the lost symbol. And
sorry.
No, go right there. That's it right there. So that's the state flag, which normally wouldn't have that black sun in the middle. But it's there for a reason. Coming up October 14th, over New Mexico is a rare solar eclipse with the Ring of Fire, where the moon will block out the sun. And, on that day in New Mexico, the tribes have a special exemption for their children to not go to school that day, to not witness the event. The Diné and the Navajo, Hopi, Pueblo tribes are going to have their kids stay home and stay indoors because it's sacred to them, the event that's happening, and they don't believe they shouldn't see it. It's like the sun and the moon getting together. You wouldn't walk in on your parents, would you?
So they're doing it out of modesty. They're trying to give the sun and moon privacy while they're intimate.
Yes. There's a regenerative moment that happens, an ethereal moment, and they don't want to see it, even though they've marked it and calculated. And see, in other tribes, and that's what we'll talk about today a little bit. We'll get into, besides New Mexico history, how some of the different esoteric societies and tribes around the world deal with eclipses.
Yeah, it's such a profound topic, Oh, sorry. It's something that we get into so much. Like, I just think like the word eclipse, comes to us from the Greek, and it has to do with this idea of abandonment. And a lot of traditional societies believed like this was an abandonment, that the sun was leaving, or the man, it was a time of like radical change and transformation, Sometimes it's sex, sometimes it's a war, sometimes it's an eating, Like I think about the Hindu mythology, in Hinduism, they have several different understandings of the eclipse. But one of the more popular ones comes from the story of the churning of the ocean of milk, where what it is you have this demon named Rahu, who he wants to get in on drinking the Amrit, the sacred milk that's said to grant immortality. So he dresses up as one of the deities, one of the good guys, and he manages to drink the milk and makes himself immortal. And what ends up happening is the goddess Mohini, which is like Vishnu in his incarnation as the divine feminine, she winds up cutting off Rahu's head and casts his head into the stars with the help of Chandra and Surya, the sun and the moon. So because of this, out of anger, Rahu, every chance he gets, comes and eats the sun and moon, And there's so many stories like this. You see a lot of dragon mythology about the great serpent coming and eating the moon. or eating the sun. It's such a wild thing to consider. Also, like I think in the Vedas, you also have, I think it's Svarbanu, which is another demon who's said to come and attack and eat the sun. And Surya is said to be the eternal enemy of Svarbanu. And then there's all these mantras that are given in order to protect one and to help aid Surya in his battle against Svarbanu. You know, and we have all these tales too about the bathing beauties. You know, you get all these stories of these forest nymphs in the Puranas who will bathe under the light of the eclipse and will be granted even like more transcendent beauty or more power. Or you're supposed to do offerings to your ancestors. So it's this interesting time because it's both auspicious and terrifying, you know?
Oh yeah. Well, some of the oldest references they have is back to Sumerian, where the kings and queens would have to pick a substitute during the eclipse, and they would step aside. In one of the oldest stories, the king becomes a farmer, and they would appoint a slave or a thief to become a king for a day.
Oh, wow.
Or sometimes even longer. And then after that, they would kill them. And then they would come back and regain the throne. Because there was lots of references to the king dying at this time. This is at eclipses is a time when the king dies, when the sun dies, when he fails, the eclipsantos, when he leaves, he fails.
This is an interesting point because we were talking about this when we were doing our research leading up to this. We were talking with some friends and talking to each other. And you were bringing up this quite a bit. There's a lot of references to Christ's crucifixion and birth happening on an eclipse. And many different Catholic groups believe this is important that you were telling me. And several of the popes have followed this pattern that Jesus is said to have followed, born and died on an eclipse. Can you talk more about that?
Oh, all those subjects, we're going to break it down. Okay. We'll deep dive on it today. Everything we talked about. So let's get into it. We'll start now. We'll go fast on this one.
Let's keep going then.
And like, subscribe, comment, share, have some fun with us. So this is Chaco Canyon, Petroglyph. To the Pueblo tribes, this represents a solar eclipse. The size is a coronal discharge. If you're familiar with the corona there, the coronate, the garland. And the garland is hot. The corona is where the heat is. The inside of the sun is cold.
Right.
You know, go figure. And so they were marking eclipses back at Chaco Canyon for several years, for up to 1,000 years. We know that. I don't know if you see on the sides like a coronal discharge, and that's what they would refer to this as the solar eclipse petroglyph. And so, with that said, I talked about we titled this episode "The Black Sun 2023." You know, and we're going to get into something now, the concept of the black sun, not just an eclipse, but the black sun. Let's hit the next pick. But look at that picture before get it in your brain before we go to the next pick. Boom, right there. Same image on the floor at that castle. You know what? I can't even think of the name of the castle. That's Himmler's castle.
Oh gosh, yeah, Himmler's castle in Germany. So yeah, this is a prominent neo-Nazi symbol. This gets scary. I'm going to look this up. What is Himmler's castle called?
All right, so at this castle, you know, when you walk in, this is one of the main spots. He has the symbol of the black sun. If you know about, yeah, where Kino did the ceremonies and stuff, as well as Himmler. They're a occult castle that the SS was using. And so on the floor, he put this symbol of the black sun. You know, it has 12 little spires. In the older versions, the pagan versions that they'll find in older Europe, they have odd numbers, 7s, 9s, and 5s. This deals with esoteric Christianity, with knights, you know, Arturian stuff, but also with Saturn. So just think of some Christian esoteric Knights of Saturn, and you got your Nazis at this castle right here.
Yeah, it's important that we break a lot of this imagery down, because like the black sun, it's such a, it is the swastika that we see, which is representative of the sun and of the changing of the seasons. But as you said, this is the Christianized Nazi version, where it's related to the zodiac, to the 12 knights, and it's related to alchemy and the element of lead, and as you said, the planet Saturn. You know, a lot of the neo-Nazis, especially, or sorry, not the neo, sorry, a lot of the Nazis were coming out of, like, Hitler becomes the centralized figure of a movement, you know, but its theology and ideology wasn't fully like amassed with until much later with Hitler, you know, and so there's a lot of this esoteric paganism, and Hitler's coming out of, and the Nazis are coming out of this moment in Europe where there is a kind of a renaissance of looking back and looking to more what they would call primitive societies, you know, but the ancient peoples, the ancient past. And you see a lot of people who are looking to these ancient ways and are seeking to go back. You know, there's a strong revitalization of Norse paganism at the same time. There's this famous movement called the Magic Circle movement. You have a bunch of different pagan philosophers such as Ludwig Klages and others who are following him, and similar people like him. But where this element comes in is it becomes related in the Norse sense to the god Wotan and to Saturn, and this returning back to a golden age, to going back to a previous time, to literally going back in time. We know that the Nazis were building their bell, and this black sun was associated with their time traveling spacecraft. And it was also associated, like Aquino talks about this, and we have to take Aquino with a grain of salt because he's a compromised, shady figure. But he seems to believe that the Nazis were interested in creating this idealized hierarchy, creating a future creating a world that no longer moved into the future, you know, creating a sort of perpetual, eternal hierarchy on Earth, making the Earth an immortal, unchanging thing, like we see at the end of Revelation. This idea, and with them on the top, you know, and a hierarchy with them on the top. You know, they were trying to return to this golden age, return to Saturn, and break with break time, stop the cycles.
Well, it's good that you say that, because during the solar eclipse, time is supposed to stand still. There's a window at that dark star, that sky gate, you know, of this primal ethereal moment, you know, that's behind creation. That's what they considered it as. You know, so let's hit the next pick. So that's the castle. And obviously you can see in the circular courtyard right there, are in that building, that's where that symbol would have been.
Wow.
You know, and it deals with eclipses, because they believe that the eclipse is this darkness overtaking the Earth, is a positive energy. Whereas the tribes I was talking about, we're going to go inside and do prayers and have rituals to protect from the negative energy, that where the demons come out. For these folks, that's the best time. Like, woo, woo, let's get the party started. And so they marked these moments in history. And at these moments of solar eclipses, when they appoint new kings and leaders. You know, that's one of the themes of the episode today as well. So let's hit the next pick.
Yeah, and I want to make sure that people understand a lot of this is these wild occult conspiracies, you know, and it goes against a lot of the mainstream approach of things, but it is an interesting thing to ponder, you know.
Yeah, walking the tightrope of speculation.
Yeah, exactly.
Make sure I don't fall here, huh? All right. Koinuntico, the Latin term, meaning the ceremony of opposites, the marriage of opposites. That's the sun and the moon uniting right there. And that's what some people think eclipse represents, when that smaller lunar energy overtakes that bigger masculine energy.
Yeah.
And produces something, a hybrid, something new.
Yeah, this gets into a lot of like, and the pagan side, which is interesting, is you get the creation of the divine hermaphrodite with this imagery. You know, an inverse to this you'll often see is the alchemical. I'm trying to remember what the name is in French, but it's the divine hermaphrodite, and you'll see it all across these alchemical images where these two figures become merged as one figure. You know, and this idea is also, it comes to us from the ancient Greeks, and it's related to the goddess Athena and the creation of the child to come, right? Which is supposed to be the reflection of Phanes. It's supposed to be both male and female and animal, something, the next evolutionary step, the greater growth of humanity, you know?
Well, that's what alchemists believe, that during an eclipse, there's a sacred marriage. And it produces this ethereal matter that you couldn't see. To the Egyptians, they called it Amen. It's that unseen energy. You know, let's hit the next pick. Boom. So earlier you talked about dragons and serpents eating the sun. Well, there's a picture right there of the golden dragon devouring the sun as a symbol of the eclipse.
Wow.
And even in the word in China, for eclipse, the root means to eat.
That's amazing.
Whereas the root in Greek was to leave or to fail.
Yeah.
You know, we're looking into these roots of what it means to people. Whereas like some people are going to be out there celebrating, having fun. Others are going to be indoors hiding from it.
Well, this is interesting though, because what you're showing us is in the pagan conception in both of those images, it's a loss, right? Or there's a war, right? And a defeat. And so most of the time these pagan people are trying to, you know, they're trying to look to the past. They're trying to honor this auspicious moment, but this is a moment of terror, you know? Whereas what we're seeing with the Nazis is not that, you know, or with the Christians, you know?
Right. Well, hit the next pick. So, you know, the Nazis, you see the swastika. Well, if you took that swastika and spun it really fast,
that's what you get.
Or if you got a solar eclipse, you get the black sun.
Wow.
And so this is a form of a Nazi flag that's based on the black sun, not the swastika, but the black sun. Because it only happens so often, whereas the rest of the time it's the swastika. And it's a powerful image to them. You know what it represents. It's alignment, you could say. Things are aligned in a straight line, and it happens twice a year. It has to happen when you got the moon, because the moon has to do it twice a year. It has to eclipse somewhere on the planet with the sun. It's just a natural thing of the spinning. You know what I'm saying? So yeah. So now
it's amazing.
We're going to talk about those conquistadors and the eclipse and the popes and how it all relates coming up to this thing, coming up to the eclipse coming up in New Mexico. So let's hit the next pick. All right. So this is called the Miracle of the Sun. We talked about Fatima, the Fatima prophecies that took place in Portugal in 1917.
Yeah, we mentioned this a few times, but for people who don't remember, what was the name of the woman?
Well, you have Lucia, Jacinta, and I think that the kid's name is Francisco.
Right, and they all have this vision about an eclipse happening, and you know they go, and it's weird because it's somewhat accepted within Catholicism, but it never gains full papal authority, right?
Well, it actually does. That's what we're going to talk about. Yeah, and so
here's sure on this
newspaper clippings from 1917. And in May, they had these visions, and the little girl said, "Hey, me and my cousins, we saw the sun dance, and the Virgin Mary talked to us. And the Virgin said that she's going to come back on October 13th and do a dance for you, and the sun's going to move around." So they all came out in Portugal, And supposedly they saw it, the miracle of the sun. The sun danced and did some eclipse kind of things. And the date was October 13th of that one, and because this date is going to mean something coming up. And in October 13th is also a date in Catholicism with the Templars, if you know anything about that.
No, I haven't heard about this. I know a fair amount about the Templars.
Well, you heard of people talk about the term Friday the 13th?
Yeah.
Why it's a bad day or unlucky, because that was the day that the popes put out an edict, a papal bull, to get rid of the Templars and take their money from them. And what's funny, some of that money went to the Order of Santiago, the ones that went to New Mexico, just saying. But listen to the next pick.
And who committed all of those genocides. Oh, my God.
Yeah, because, so there they are. That's at the right is Lucia, and at the left is Jacinta. And so October 13th, 1930, they actually proclaimed that it was a real miracle and founded a cult within the Catholic Church. I just wanted to let you know that. And because it deals with that date as well. And then even another time, in 1951, they put out a declaration on October 13th that the Pope had witnessed the miracle of the sun from his gardens.
Oh?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
That's
and so, yeah, they used that date to mark time. And even years later, they dug up her body, poor Jacinta. If you could hit the next pick.
Also, I just want to say that these are the hardest looking kids I've ever seen. My gosh. Lucinda looks like she's seen hell and back.
That's her body right there.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. They years later, they dug up her body.
Why
Not
did they
Lucia, but Jacinta, because in the past videos, we talked about how Lucia went and spoke with the popes and gave them a prophecy, and they didn't really listen to it. Well, here they are digging up her body to exhume it because it didn't decay. Her little body, and they worship the body.
This is a trope we see in Catholicism, the undecaying body. Like a lot of saints' bodies are said. This is one of the miracles of sainthood, is that the body doesn't decay. When I was in India, they have Saint, what's his name? Saint Francis Xavier's body. And it's in like a gold display. And you can't look at it directly, but you can look at it through a mirror, and they'll bring it out on his saint day and march it through the town.
Oh, yeah. And so, because, after that prophecy they gave in 1917, they died 2 years later, her and the young man. And then Lucia lived years later, and she met with both popes, with two of the popes that we're actually going to talk about coming up next, because it deals with eclipses. It deals with the sun, and it deals with a certain date. And so, yeah, let's hit the next pick. Boom. Oh. Look at this vato right there.
On the Pope throne, which Francis famously got rid of this satchel and this throne. He retired them.
I didn't know that. Okay,
yeah. It was a big deal what he did, too.
All right. So this is Pius XII. And he's the one that said he witnessed the miracle of the sun in 1951 from the gardens there.
Oh.
And he said he saw the sun do a dance for him and eclipses. And
okay.
And he hammed it up. Pius XII is considered the last pope in certain Catholic orders.
Yeah, the traditionalist Catholics are like this, right?
Yeah.
They don't agree with Vatican II.
Well, yeah, we're going to get into all that. And there's a little bit why it happened. And you could see he believed he was a holy person. Like they were carrying him and he was producing miracles. And, there's more to him because he's considered the Nazi pope. Before he even got into office, he had signed something called the Reichskonkordat, which is a concordance between, he went and signed a deal with the Nazis, with the Catholic Church, before he even became pope. As an archbishop, they sent him on behalf of the Pope Leo, I think, Pope Leo the 13th. And if I'm not correct. And so you could talk about these, him as a Nazi pope. You've ever heard the term rat lines?
I'm familiar. It sounds familiar.
Well, what's a rat line? A rat line was, you heard of Harriet Tubman set up the Underground Railroad for people to escape. Well, he helped set up an Underground Railroad for Nazis to escape. And they call that the Rat Lines, or AKA the Monastery Road.
Yeah,
and these churches
Canada into Argentina.
Documents. Yeah, they would issue documents and papers to Nazis, new identities, and help them go live in new places as good little Catholics.
It's kind of funny that this is happening. We're having this discussion now because right now in Canada, this has become this whole big international issue for us. And the fact that our government used to harbor Nazis, because one of them, we decided to honor this guy Hunka, who was a member of the SS. Now, I don't know if he did anything personally, but he was a member of the SS and he fought on the side of the Nazis. And they honored him as a Ukrainian hero in Canadian Parliament and as a Canadian hero. And no one knew that he had ties to being a Nazi, and no one even thought to look. And because of this, it's having this whole big like wake up moment in Canada where all these people are looking back and being like, wait a second, there was an actual policy in Canada because we were so anti-communist and we wanted to court anti-communist peoples that if you had the famous SS tattoo, it was basically a walk across the border and come join us pass. Yeah. Just ridiculous and evil. It's so shameful, but that's what we have to talk about it.
Well, this Pope right here is one of the last, let's say, Orthodox in terms of that he was nobility, Italian nobility. He didn't even study at the seminary. He went there for a couple months, didn't like the food, and they gave him private studies at his house. He was ordained as a priest at a private chapel dealing with the Italian nobility. They fast-tracked him, that he was bringing back the old ways. That's what he was about. People will talk about that. And so here's the thing. He died in October 1958. And that same month, there was a lunar and a solar eclipse.
Oh, wow.
And the reason that this matters is because if you look at the history of popes, there's a lot of them being ordained, dying, or being born around eclipses. And it might not even be if that's where they were really born, but they'll put it on that date, or they'll poison them on that date just to make sure.
Yeah, because it's significant. That imagery matters, right?
And so, and I showed you how they dug up little Jacinta's body because it was preserved. It didn't decay. Well, they tried to do something with his body when he died. They tried to turn him, they tried to mummify him Jesus style based on the conditions in the Bible. And so they did this whole thing and wrapped him in 3 days and the whole thing. And because they thought he was so holy. And when they came back and unwrapped him, his nose was falling off. He was decaying so bad. So they scrapped that idea.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they were trying to resurrect Pius XII. This is true. You can look that up. You can look it up. So, and the thing is, his replacement only lasted a day. You're not even going to hear about his replacement. His name is Giuseppe Siri. You know how they burn the thing and the white smoke comes?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, it happened. He had a replacement. A day later, that dude was gone.
And what happened? I've never heard of this.
Yeah, no, you can look up Giuseppe Siri. And then what happened is they put Pope John the 23rd, who was a very old guy, who was only there for a few years. And the reason they couldn't put him, or the reason they put him was because the choice that they wanted wasn't ordained as a cardinal yet, because Pius XII was holding somebody back, his competition. And so when he died, his competition couldn't take over. So they put this very old man. And what that old man did was start something called Vatican II.
Yeah.
And people don't, that's where it separates the church. It goes from the Latin Mass into people say Freemasonic stuff, because this is all Masonic story. If you get into it at this point, these
is important.
Masonic popes.
It's important to get into, but basically, Catholicism was having a major problem. It still does have these same problems, but there is an austerity in Catholicism. There's a focus upon, in traditional Catholicism, there's this deep austerity and a focus upon sin and a focus upon orthopraxis. It's all about what you have to do, these specific rituals in a specific way. And people were reluctant to adopt more modern methods of preaching, more modern methods of worship. There was a strong fight amongst these things, and Catholicism was losing a lot of followers. So there was a strong push to say, well, what if we started to do things like, instead of singing these old Latin chants and these operatic ballads, what if we sang 60s rock pop? Basically, if you go into a modern Catholic church, that's what it all sounds like, because this happened in the 60s, right? So it all sounds like 60s folk rock pop, like Peter, Paul, and Mary, who you got to play with there. But it was really deep, and it was all across the board, because you got to remember is that traditional Catholicism is very much it's like a very controlling, very austere doctrine of trying to constantly repent, whereas a lot of Protestant Christianity, it focuses upon it doesn't have such a focus on work. And because it doesn't have such a focus on work and on deeds and whatnot, because you can be freed from sin, it allows people, to get out from under that oppressive heel. But with traditional Catholicism, there's such a philosophical and ideological pressure put on the practitioner about sin and right action. You can't do anything. In my experience, I grew up Catholic, and I did switch into an evangelical church, but a lot of these philosophical ideas held serious weight on me, and in talking to family members and to friends who were involved in this, it's like this, there's a word for it. I'm trying to remember. There's a psychological word for it, but people become obsessed with right action and with hurting themselves or punishing themselves for bad action, and it's like to the point where a lot of the sexual abuse that you see within the Catholic Church is not even physical. Okay. The physical abuse is the one we hear about, and that's all there, and that's all true. But what you don't hear about is the rampant psychological sexual abuse, where these old priests are telling young children to hate their emotions and to punish themselves mentally, to do things like pray on your knuckles, or to sleep on the floor, or to, you recite prayers until you fall asleep from exhaustion, this deep self-loathing. Anyway, sorry for that rant, but it's personal to me,
Get it out. That's right. Well, hit the next picture, because I want to show you that the Pope that replaced him, the old dude. All right, so that's Giuseppe Siri. That was only a Pope for a day. Go to the next pic, because he only lasted a day. They took him out. They said, "No, you can't be Pope." And they put the next guy, who was the 23rd. And what's interesting about him, if you had the next pic, they actually mummified his body.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so they tried it with Pius XII, and they failed, using it Jesus style. So in 1975, they dug up his body, and they mummified it. He's the only Pope to be mummified. And you could go see him on display in public. But part of the process, several people died. 3, 4, 5, 6 people died mummifying him from the chemicals. And then they said they scrapped that idea. He's the only Pope to be mummified. So he's only around for 5 years, starts Vatican II, and then his successor, because once he becomes Pope, the first thing he does, he makes this one Pope a cardinal. This one bishop a cardinal, or whatever it is, this priest. And that's going to be his successor. The guy who was going to be the Pope anyways, but he wasn't in the ranking enough, so they couldn't put him up there yet. So this guy puts him, and then they have another eclipse. Remind you, this is about eclipses. So you hit the next picture. So we've talked about him right there, 1963. That's Pope Paul VI. And I showed you pictures of him with Kennedy and the Brown family and the head of the servants of the Paraclete, Fitzgerald.
Yeah,
and yeah, so he was going to be the new pope after Pius XII. But they had the other dude because he wasn't a cardinal yet. And they started Vatican II. He finishes Vatican II. And they're both heavy Freemasons. So he is made a pope on June 21st on the summer solstice. A month later, there's an eclipse. Then he goes to meet with King Hussein of Jordan. He goes to Petra in Jerusalem. And if you know anything about King Hussein, at that time, he was called the custodian, the Hashemite kingdom of the three antiquities of Judaism, of the Jewish sites in Israel, of the Christian sites, and of the Muslim sites. He was in charge of all the ancient Middle Eastern temples through the Hashemite kingdom and through this tradition that goes back thousands of years. They just ended it a couple years ago.
Wow.
And so with him in charge, he was keeping peace so that the Temple Mount could have Christians, Jews, and Muslims all at the same time. And so there's an eclipse. He gets on the plane to go meet him. He's the first pope that's done that and did a pilgrimage, left Rome. He's like, nah, I'm going to Petra. I'm going to Jerusalem. And then all the people come and have private audiences with them. We've talked about him in the past. And then when he dies, there's more eclipse stuff happening. It's a weird phenomenon, these kingmakers and eclipses. So hit the next picture.
Wow. Oops, sorry. There we go.
Boom.
Here's our boy.
Yeah. So in between, he's the new pope. But
Pope John Paul II.
Pope in between. There was another pope in between. In between John Paul II, there was John Paul I. He only lasted 33 days.
Right.
33 days, and he was poisoned in his bed. And then
As part of the Vatican, well, there's a lot of speculation, but there isn't direct evidence. But potentially, this was about Vatican II. Like, this is how intense this is for Catholics,
And Freemasonry, because he's only in charge for 33 days. And on the 33rd day, he called him into the office and says, hey, I want the head of the Vatican Bank to resign, and I want all you Freemason dudes. We can't do this no more. That night he's poisoned. And then he becomes a new pope. Now, John Paul II is special. He's born on a solar eclipse. He dies on a solar eclipse, and he witnesses a solar eclipse from that castle that I showed you where they have the Luciferian telescopes.
Yes.
And is he looking through obsidian or polished meteorite?
There's so much. Okay, put on your conspiracy hats because we're diving into
I got it all already. Shit.
So take this with the grainiest of salt. But a lot of these weirdo occultists online and whatnot will talk about Lucifer's telescope, and they connect it to. There's a really famous eidolon or idol, pagan idol, related to the goddess Rhea Sibylle. And there's a lot of stories about this idol, but the most famous one comes to us from the Emperor Julian, the philosopher or the apostate, who writes in his hymn to the Mother of the Gods. He talks about how they take this eidolon from Pergamon, which is a very important pagan city. It also features in Revelation. They take this eidolon from Pergamon to Rome, and they install it in Rome. And the pagans believed that this was like they started worshiping the Great Mother in Rome, and that this led to the creation of empire. It allowed them to defeat Carthage. It turned them into the greatest empire on earth. Okay? So then people wondered, what happened to the great living eidolon that was in Rome? That is this mysterious, some people described it as obsidian, other people described it as potentially a type of meteorite, So we don't know 100%, but a lot of these occultists believe that they took the meteorite or this obsidian glass, and they turned it into the lens for this Luciferian telescope that they use to pierce through the veil of time and all this stuff.
There's more reasons. We're going to get into it. So, like I was talking about, he becomes Pope after the September 16th, 1978 solar eclipse. And so, that's Pope Paul II. A lot of the nodes that these eclipses are happening in are in Virgo and Pisces. That's part of the mythology within the esoteric Catholicism and the Pope making. So let's hit the next pick.
Virgin Mary and the fish, which is Christ.
Hit the next pick, and we'll understand. Get more deep into it. Why he's looking and keeping track of the solar eclipse. All right, this is from a movie right here. Barabbas was it 1961. It's about the thief who doesn't get crucified and then gets what's the word? He gets pardoned, I think is the full story. But
yeah, so Jesus Barabbas, there's Jesus, and then there's Jesus of Barabbas. And the famous story is that when Pontius Pilate calls for a pardon, he says, I'm going to be a nice guy, and I'm going to allow one of these people who's getting crucified here to be pardoned. The public doesn't call out for Jesus, the Messiah. They call out for Jesus Barabbas, and there's all kinds of weird theories about who this particular person is and what's going on. Ammon in his Satanic Initiation series talks about how all of those people were child traffickers, were pirates who were being crucified with Jesus at this time. And he said that Jesus Barabbas was a known pirate. So, but again, who knows?
Well, they made a movie about it in 1961, and to make it authentic, they filmed the crucifixion scene during an actual eclipse. That's a real eclipse going on.
That's dedication right there.
Dedication, because in that moment they know that this primordial energy is there. There's a skygate, a stargate to the dark star. It's things can be reborn. It's that almond energy.
Just also before we go too far from Pope John Paul II, I wanted to mention that there were 2 assassination attempts on him, and one of them we know was confirmed about Vatican II. He got stabbed. He's the one who brought about the Pope Mobile. I'm sure you guys remember those memes from the 90s, and they made fun of it on Simpsons where he had the bulletproof glass. It's because they kept trying to kill him over Vatican II.
Yeah. No, this is some serious stuff. I wasn't raised Catholic, so when I started researching it, I was like, oh, whoa, we'll get into this. So we talked about Hermanos Penitentiae. Remember they recreate the crucifixion?
Right.
All right, so check this out. Before we even get to them, during solar eclipses, a lot of strange phenomena happens. This is the concept of solar snakes. That's a white paper on the ground or a tarp, and during a solar eclipse, there'll be these shadows or these snakes will move around on the ground in all directions. It's part of the refraction of the light, some kind of process. And it's called solar bands or solar snakes. There'll be a corona rainbows. There's all kinds of things that happen, like animals. Bats come out. Certain animals are, because of the sound. Some birds go silent. Some animals produce chemicals because they think it's nighttime. Its circadian rhythm changes. They get all freaked out. Yeah, definitely. Whales and dolphins will surface because they're thinking, oh, it's time, and they go up.
Well, there's so many animals that are, that would have looked to the moon for guidance at night. So when the moon isn't there, it would be such a profound effect. And we know so many animals now freak out, and insects, because of all of our artificial light. Like when I went to Iceland a few years ago, and I watched them. We went to go visit and check out the puffins, and the puffins they use the moon for guidance, but the artificial lights mess them up. So people have to go up onto these cliffs and chuck the puffins out into the water because they don't know which direction to jump in. because of all of the artificial lighting, you know?
Oh, it's even said that like with humans, the pineal gland is affected,
Oh,
and people
wow.
purposely, and they'll monitor the pineal gland during the eclipse, and they do all these different studies. But like, yeah, let's hit the next pick.
That's interesting. And we know like the pineal gland is so important, like for all of this stuff. The Hindus and the Egyptians both believed it was the center place for producing these God experiences, you
Oh
know?
yeah, can you pronounce that for me?
Umbraphile, shadow lover, a person who chases eclipses.
Oh yeah, it's a
Interesting.
thing. It's a thing. Besides the Vatican and shamans doing it, modern people love it because they happen
Oh,
every
why
year
not?
all over the world, and people love it. They think it releases something in their pineal gland, brings them closer to the earth, and for some people it's just a rush. Hit the next pick. Boom, right there, October 14th, 2023, right over New Mexico, Roswell, Santa Fe, Albuquerque. There's going to be a Chaco Canyon. This is going to be a type of a solar eclipse where there's a ring of fire. It says annular. That doesn't mean annual. That means the type of eclipse where there's a ring of fire. You get the corona around the
Incredible.
moon.
So this is like a super rare phenomenon, and it's going to happen right over Chaco Canyon.
Oh, what's happened before? And they would mark it, and they already
Amazing.
did. And so, oh yeah, definitely. Hit the next pick. Somebody who's keeping tabs on this eclipse. Hermanos Penitentious, the Brothers of Penitence. So we talked about them. They're a Catholic secret society. They used to do parades through Albuquerque and Santa Fe where they whip themselves and do crucifixions. You talked about the stigmatas, that some of them, they want the final stigmata where they pierce themselves in the side there. So they would get the final wound and die.
Well,
Um,
in the Philippines, it became such a big thing where they'll go through the full crucifixion, meaning they'll stick themselves up. And then some people would also, not everyone, but some people would ask to be stabbed to
yeah,
get the final, you want all of the wounds of Christ.
yeah.
And some of these people died. So the Filipino government had to step in and be like, no, you can't do all of those. And now they have to monitor it because people were going into religious frenzy and committing, a form of religious suicide.
Well, there's a certain condition that isn't always there, and that's the eclipse.
Right.
You need the eclipse for the ritual to work. So we're pretty sure that coming up, they're going to be doing it October 14th. And why? There's more to the story. Remember, we were talking about October 13th, Friday the 13th.
Amazing.
Dealing with there's more than one thing coinciding here. It's not
So
just the moon and
many.
the sun. It's a certain date. It's a certain time of year. Certain things happening at a certain location. Just saying,
Yeah.
if you have eyes to see and ears to hear, there's something happening. And
So Dion, are you gonna make the trip out to Chaco
no,
Canyon?
it's too expensive. I looked it up. The airfare was double. Just to stay at Motel 6 cost $300. So I was like, damn.
Oh, of course.
If I would have known ahead of time, but we didn't know. But yeah, it's going to be wild. In the ritual, so Passion Week. That's the week leading up to the. So the Passion Week is going to be starting next week for them for the solar eclipse crucifixion. And I bet you they're going to recreate all the rituals. Why just do the crucifixion? They could do the Last Supper the night before on Friday the 13th. The agape love feast, the reclining agape love feast.
I was just gonna say
Come
that
on
puts some
now.
really dark images in my head with
The
Mark.
garden at 12 o'clock at night. Take you to the garden. Come on, they're going to do the donkey because they got to commune with Set. He's got to ride through town with Set.
Keep these guys away from little boys. We don't want them recreating Mark 15.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. They do other parts of the story because it's called Passion Week.
Wow.
You got to lead up to it. And they then get the magic moment with that ethereal energy, that dark matter comes out, that they're going to be reborn when time stops. But there's more people that are going to be there besides just them. Hit the next pick. Very interesting. It goes over the balloon fiesta. All right, the International Balloon Fiesta, the biggest event of balloons around the world. And they go up in the sky and they do all kinds of things, and every year. Well, it just so happens it's going right. The eclipse is going right over it. The balloons are going to light up and do designs in the sky. NASA has partnered with them. NASA, go to the next pic. NASA's printed up 80,000 eclipse glasses for people to come view. There's going to be millions of people there for this event. They're warning people like, hey, if you're going to be watching, put glasses, watch it through the pinhole, watch it through your phone, some other way, but don't
blind yourself, right?
Yeah. And so NASA's also going to be doing research during the event. They're going to be studying the coronal discharge, the winds, because the wind changes direction. If you're on the ground during an eclipse, the wind will change direction. That's part of something that happens. Remember, we showed you the VLA, the Very Large Array of Antennas that looks for radio signals from outer space. They're going to be pointed towards the eclipse, seeing if they can get radio signals from it during the event. NASA's taking it very serious. Not only that, they're going to have raves. They're having the moon landing rave. They're having events in Taos. They're having something at Albuquerque viewing parties. Chaco Canyon is sold out. There are going to be people there viewing it at the Stones.
Wow.
And like I said, NASA is going to be at, it's called Balloon Fiesta Park. Now hit the next pic, and we'll get more into Balloon Fiesta Park. There it is right there. Oh, yeah. And you notice that shape right there? You got a little shape there. You got your...
Is that our horse hoof, our heart of Aphrodite all over again?
that's called the observation or a post. That's where they're going to be viewing. NASA is set up shop right there. And they're going to be viewing from the eclipse with all the balloons in the sky. Hit the next pic. And you can see the advertisement for it. It's called the observation deck.
Wow.
And it's at that spot, October 14th in the morning, you could witness this rare occurrence that's taken place several times because it's already marked in the archaeoastronomy, in the culture there. The observation deck.
That's so wild. So yeah, if we have any friends who are near to Chaco Canyon, near to San Jose, New Mexico, go make the trip.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Tell us all about it. We want to hear.
Oh yeah. A magical event. With the sun, the moon. There's just so much involved in this. People talk about New Mexico and UFOs and ancient aliens. You want some UFOs in New Mexico? October 14th, get your ass there. Friday 13th, the night before, be partying and wake up and see that eclipse. Get your UFO.
Just craziness. Something is going to go down. I wouldn't be surprised if one of these priests accidentally dies while enacting these rites.
They'll bury him. They do it every year. They bury him somewhere.
Yeah, craziness. But yeah, folks, like and subscribe. Tell us what you think. Give us any information or any thoughts that you have on conspiracies or ideas about New Mexico or anywhere else for that matter, right?
Yeah, and next week, join us, episode 33, our 33rd special 33rd degree, the 33rd parallel, latitude, longitude, more eclipse stuff.
And the power of threes, the rule of three, the triad, the Holy Trinity. We're going to be breaking it all down. This is a sacred image. The three with the triangle, the pyramid. That's the power of creation, right? If you have it with the one on the top, that's creation expanding into matter. If you have it with the one on the bottom, that's us returning back to creation. It's that's why the diamond is so important. Anyway, we're going to get all into this craziness, right? There's a reasons why everyone is talking about this 33. Why is pi 3.33333? All of this.
We'll find out, maybe.
3.14, but you know what I mean. It gets crazy. Anyway, we're going to have some fun, and we're hoping to bring some guests. We're going to be talking to some peoples to see. But tune in next week for our 33rd episode spectacular. And Yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning in today. Do you have anything you want to leave us with, Dion?
Oh, just keep your head up, stay blessed, have fun.
Yeah. And you know what? Pay attention. Try to get out and witness this eclipse,
Oh, yeah.
or at least look at it online. It's an interesting phenomenon. And if you're near New Mexico, make the trip. All right, everyone. Peace, love, hail Satan. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. We're the Occult Explorers.